What happened to you in the spring of 2017, the spring of 2009, and the spring of 2001? Because the thing that happened to you, or at least the cycle that you might be able to see in the spring of 2001, 2009, and 2017, is going to be happening again this spring of 2025. Why is that? Well, every 8 years, Venus goes retrograde in the exact same zodiac sign, just -2 degrees each time. And this spring of 2025, we have Venus stationing retrograde in Aries, and it will retrogress back into Pisces, where it will station direct between March and April of 2025. And so in this video, we're going to be talking all about the Venus retrograde coming up, why it's going to be important, all of the transits in between, and at the very end, we're going to be going over how it's going to be affecting every single zodiac sign. So if you haven't already, make sure you like this video. It actually does support the channel and really helps me out. Comment below, let me know what you're looking forward to, what you're planning for. I really want to know what you guys are planning for with this Venus retrograde, because so much is actually happening in the middle of it, as well as subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up to date with everything that's going on in the astrology. So let's go ahead and jump into it. If you don't know me already, my name is Cam Wyatt. I'm a professional astrologer. I've been doing this for almost a decade, and my job is to let you guys know what is going on in the universe and how to best use it to your advantage. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I love talking about astrology, especially transiting astrology. And the reason I'm excited about talking about this Venus retrograde is this isn't like a typical Venus retrograde, and not that it's anything different in terms of like, yeah, Venus is going to go from the evening star to the morning star, which is what a Venus retrograde essentially is, but it's everything that's happening in between. If you've been following me or really any astrologer for some time, we've talked a lot about how big 2025 is in terms of all of the changes that are happening. And it's really this Venus retrograde that ushers all of it in. And I'm going to be having a lot of videos about the things that are happening in between this Venus retrograde. For example, there's a Mercury retrograde happening during the Venus retrograde. There's eclipses happening in between the Venus retrograde. Neptune's moving into Aries. Saturn's moving into Aries. And so much more is happening too. And so we're going to make videos about that and talk about that. But today we're just going to focus strictly on the Venus retrograde part, which is actually really hard because this transit isn't just the Venus retrograde. It's like, yes, the Venus retrograde and everything else that's happening on top of it. So keep that in mind while you're watching this video as we talk about the Venus retrograde and what it means and what it represents and how it affects your zodiac sign, that there's more to it than just that because of how much else is happening. But like I said, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to see the videos I'm going to be making about everything else that's happening in between. So first off, let's just talk about the quick astronomy of a Venus retrograde. I'm recording this in early February, and if you go outside just after sunset in early February, you will be able to see Venus as evening star. She's really, really bright. Like just after sunset, you're going to see a really, really, really bright star, and that's Venus. And essentially, a Venus retrograde is the time when Venus goes in between the sun and the earth. And how this visually looks in the astronomy is like, hey, Venus goes from evening star, she starts going backwards in the zodiac, starts getting closer and closer to the sun. That's when Venus is going in between the sun and the earth. And then she gets pooped out to the morning star. And if you wake up before sunrise, somewhere around April and May, and you'll really see this around June, you'll see Venus as morning star. And so if you get up about an hour before sunrise, you'll see Venus super, super bright in the morning. And that's when Venus is fully on the other side and starting to make her way towards the far side of the sun. And Venus retrogrades are just really fun to see in the sky in general, but I want to talk about really quickly what a Venus retrograde means. So there's really 3 things I want to go over in terms of what a Venus retrograde means. For the sake of ease and for the sake of this video, the one thing I want to talk about with this Venus retrograde and what it means is that it essentially means change. Now, I know that sounds incredibly vague. I know that sounds weird, but the reason I'm bringing that up is there's so much happening in the sky, in this specific part of the sky over the next few months, that it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't necessarily matter individually. It's like, hey, all of this is changing right here. And when you look at your birth chart and you look at what houses Venus rules, and we'll talk about this in the part of the video where we go over how it's going to affect your zodiac sign, but like, what houses does Venus rule and where is she going to go retrograde in? You can say that that part of your life, that area of your life, will have some sort of a change. Now, what does that change look like? I've always interpreted Venus retrogrades as reevaluations. What's really funny about Venus is Venus rules value, but not necessarily money. If you know anything about money and it's just numbers, essentially. It's all made up. It's not even real. And that's much more of a Mercury ruled thing. Venus is more so of value, though. What do we place value in? And so a Venus retrograde is often interpreted as a reevaluation of something. So again, depending on where this is at in your birth chart, there will be a reevaluation of that area. And in astrological phases, Venus as evening star is very receptive to things. Like things are coming to Venus when she's evening star. But as she goes retrograde, there's this like repulsion and not wanting things. And as Venus stations direct and becomes morning star and begins to move forward, Venus is much more pursuant of something. And so the Venus retrograde phase is like a reevaluation of something. It's going from, hey, I'm getting this and I don't really like this anymore. And so I'm going to change what I like, change what I want, and then I'm going to move over towards this area. And the reason it rules reevaluation is Venus rules value. She also rules pleasure, love, romance, connection. Most people understand that Venus rules things like love and romance. But again, Venus rules value, connection, bringing things together. Venus is really sticky. And Venus just generally represents like the more fun things in life. Now, the issue is when Venus is retrograde, it's hard to enjoy things as much, like especially if you have Venus retrograde in your birth chart, like the way that you enjoy things or the way that you go about pleasure is typically going to be unorthodox or different. Now, that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, and that is not what this video is going to be about. But long story short, this Venus retrograde is going to represent a reevaluation. So before we even go into the Zodiac part, I want you to start thinking about what house Aries and Pisces rules in your chart and how maybe you're starting to really reevaluate that area of your life. So let's actually start talking about all of the transits that are happening with this Venus retrograde. But first off, if you want to learn more about the planets in astrology, I'm actually launching my planets course over on my website. If you become a member, you're going to have access to the How to Read Your Birth Chart course. We just completed the Zodiac course. We go super in depth into everything you need to know about the Zodiac. And now starting in February, we are doing the planets. As well, you're going to get monthly rising sign horoscopes, as well as what I call the monthly game plan, which essentially is a monthly horoscope, but just more tailored towards personal development and giving you actual insightful advice to use as you go about your month ahead. So if you want access to a growing library of astrology lectures and courses, as well as monthly rising sign horoscopes and more, and if you want to get a consultation from me, you would actually have to become a member because my consultations are only available for members at this moment. So if you're interested in that, make sure you check out my website in the link below and become a member. So every Venus retrograde starts with Venus entering shadow, and Venus entered shadow on January 28th at 24 degrees Pisces. This means Venus will be coming back to this degree and she will station direct, which essentially means this is where Venus will come back to after she's done moving backwards. She will get to this degree and start moving forward again. And the big thing here is on January 28th, this is when you're going to start to see the themes of the Venus retrograde manifest themselves. And they may not be fully obvious to you at that time, right? It's just important to really remember, like, hey, what was going on at the end of January for you? Because even though something might be subtle or something may not seem that important, it will be important as the months go on. And like I said, there's a lot happening in the middle of this Venus retrograde. And one of the things, the next transit is on February 1st, we had Venus conjoin Neptune at 27 degrees Pisces. This is really important because Neptune is all about illusion, fantasy, mysticism. It rules the media. It rules deception. And Venus is all about pleasure and fun, and she's exalted in Pisces. Venus loves being in Pisces. She has access to all the tools and resources she needs in order to do her job, which is about having fun, creating value, pleasure. But she's conjoining Neptune, where this could either be very romanticized, very idealized, but then also it can be deceptive. And this is really important because on February 1st, there's going to be this level of deception or confusion or being overwhelmed that you're going to see come up a lot. Then later on February 1st, we'll have the next thing, which is Venus conjoining the North Node. Now, the North Node is essentially the symbol for where the eclipses are going to be happening at any given point. The North Node kind of shows us like where we're focused on, what direction the wind is pointing towards, where we're kind of getting pushed towards, what we're hungry for. And the North Node is conjoining Neptune right now. And Venus is conjoining the North Node, where it's like things like desires and pleasure and value and fun and connection is like being turned up to like 11 right now. And so that happens on February 1st. But then we get to February 4th, and this is when Venus enters Aries. Now, one of the main things to understand about this Venus retrograde is Venus is going from her exalted sign to her sign of detriment. What does that mean? This is stuff I talk about in my How to Read Your Birth Chart course over on my memberships, as well as I think I talk about the Zodiac course too, and I will talk about it in the planets course too. But planets do better in certain signs than others. Venus rules over Taurus and Libra. Those are her home signs, but she's exalted in Pisces. The idea is she does really well in Taurus and Libra, but she is responsible for those signs. So it's kind of like her issue. But Venus is exalted in Pisces, which means she has all the access to everything she could ever need. It's a lot of fun, but without any of the responsibilities. So you could arguably say Venus does even better in Pisces than she does do in Taurus and Libra. But Venus is in detriment in Aries. The reason being is Aries is a Mars ruled sign. Mars is about fights and conflicts, and Venus is about love and peace and balance. So Venus just doesn't do all of that well here. And so what's really interesting about this Venus retrograde is we're going from Venus super exalted to in detriment in Aries. And as Venus enters Aries on February 4th, the feeling is going to go from less of like, oh, I'm like enjoying and having pleasure to like, I want to take what's mine. Venus in Pisces is very like receptive and open and just a little bit all over the place. But Venus in Aries is much more like taking or much more give me. A modern way I can look at Venus in Pisces versus Venus in Aries is like, I don't know, I guess when I think of Venus in Pisces conjoining Neptune, I think of like someone like Chapel Rowan, who's just like, I don't know, weird and, all over the place. I don't know that much about her. And then Venus in Aries, I always think of like G.I. Jane or Milan or Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Like, it's just kind of like, hey, like I'm a girl in a man's world and I'm just going to do my thing. And I know that sounds kind of facetious and a little bit tongue in cheek, but the idea here is Venus is doing her thing, which is about fun, connection, but she's in detriment in Aries. She has to do it in a very aggressive territory or doing it with aggressive tools. So Venus goes into Aries on February 4th. And then as we go throughout the rest of February, Venus slows down. She stays in Aries and not much happens, but she slows down. And then she stations retrograde at 10 degrees Aries on March 1st of 2025. So if you have a planet at 10 degrees Aries, Capricorn, Cancer, or Libra, this will affect you a lot more than most other zodiac signs. But Venus going retrograde, this is when we go, oh, hey, I'm receiving this, but I don't want it anymore. Like I said, evening star Venus is very like receiving things. Like, again, like imagine you are like a celebrity and you're getting some sort of publicity and you're not liking the certain publicity that you're getting. Venus retrograde is like, hey, I don't really like this and I need to change my image. I need to change exactly how I come off to people so I can get the sort of publicity I would want. So now that Venus is retrograde, we actually have quite a few transits that happen in the middle of the Venus retrograde. First one is Venus conjoins Mercury at 8 degrees Aries on March 11th of 2025. What's interesting about this is typically Venus is going to conjoin Mercury when Venus is retrograde because Mercury and Venus are really never all that far away from one another. But Mercury will go retrograde with Venus at this time. And this seems a little bit more important. Mercury often acts as like a microphone. Mercury often acts as like a messenger. And so it's going to be communicating what the Venus retrograde stuff is about. So there's something about March 11th where we get a little bit more insight into what the Venus retrograde really is. Then we get to the halfway point of the Venus retrograde, which is the Venus cazimi. So many people get caught up on this word cazimi. It's a fancy word for saying heart of the sun. That essentially means Venus conjoins the sun. And this is what we call the halfway point of the Venus retrograde. This is on March 22nd of 2025. And essentially the idea here is like cazimi is like being purified by fire. And so as Venus is retrograde and there's this like, oh, I don't like this anymore. I don't want this anymore. That Venus cazimi moment is kind of like, have you ever like not liked something, but you were afraid to admit it to yourself? And then one day you just admit it. You're like, you know what? I don't like this anymore. I don't fucking want to do this. That's like the Venus cazimi moment. And that's happening at 2 degrees Aries as well. So again, look at the, look if you have any planets at 2 degrees of the cardinal signs that will impact you a little bit more. But what's really interesting to me about this Venus retrograde is this Venus cazimi is the sun in Aries. The sun is exalted in Aries. It's super like, again, like solar is very like, here's my willpower here. Like I'm going to be courageous. I'm going to be bold, but Venus is in detriment and we have this cazimi moment. But then 5 days later on March 27th of 2025, Venus retrogresses back into Pisces. So now Venus is back to being exalted and the sun is exalted. Where what's really interesting to me is on March 27th, the vibe changes from going like, hey, I was trying to do something that I wasn't all that good at doing. I was wanting something that I wasn't all that good at wanting or getting. And then Venus goes back into Pisces where it just becomes easy. Where like, I feel like a lot of this Venus retrograde is like wanting something really bad and not realizing like you don't have access to the tools and resources. And then you just have to have this reevaluation of how you go about it to where then it becomes really easy to get what you want. Because that's the difference of Venus in Aries versus Venus in Pisces. Venus in Aries is just going to take what they want, and that's not always a thing that you want to do, versus Venus in Pisces just gets what she wants no matter what the situation is. But during this retrograde phase, it's like realizing you can't just take what you want or that's not going to work. So you kind of have to like learn to like schmooze the universe to like get it to you. That's really the vibe I'm seeing with this. And then also on March 27th is when Venus, as she's retrograde, conjoins Neptune again, which is very overwhelming and confusing and being like, oh my God, is this really what I want? It's like, it's kind of like just really seeing things with rose-colored glasses in a really, really good way. But I think it's also reevaluating what is deceptive to you. Like Neptune rules deception, it rules illusion and fantasy. And there's a good part of that, which is like, hey, there's a lot of like rose-colored glasses, fun things going on here. But Venus retrograde is being about reevaluation and conjoining Neptune is like, hey, What did I see incorrectly here? Where was I deceived here? And how can I be a little bit more clear about what I'm going for? And then once we get to April 1st, this is when Venus conjoins the North Node. So again, this is like really turning up the knob on, hey, I'm reevaluating this. I want this instead. I want to do this. Then a few days later on April 6th, we get Venus making a trine to Mars in Cancer. This is just good. Like, this is kind of a whole different story to talk about, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but we like Venus retrograde in Pisces trining Mars in Cancer. That's only a good thing. But when we get to April 7th of 2025, Venus is going to both conjoin Saturn and sextile Uranus. Now, this is the thing about this Venus retrograde, is that Venus is going to be stationing on Saturn, and Saturn is going to get really, really close to Neptune. And I know that sounds like Japanese for people that aren't that familiar with astrology. But the thing is, Saturn rules reality. It rules governments. It rules concrete things. It's very serious. But Neptune rules illusion and fantasy and mysticism, right? So like the planet of reality is conjoining the planet of like illusion. So there's a lot of things that are really, really confusing with this. And Venus is going to go over Neptune, and then she's going to station pretty much direct on Saturn. And as Venus conjoins Saturn, Saturn is about boundaries and rules and limitations and commitment. And Venus conjoining Saturn is kind of like being a lot more serious, being a lot more committed, being a lot more like stable when it comes to the things that you want, the things that you desire, or having limitations on them. Or again, if Venus is all about reevaluations and she's going to be conjoining Saturn, there's this reevaluation of your commitments, reevaluation of what your responsibilities are. And also on April 7th, Venus sextiles Uranus. Not the biggest deal, but this is some sort of like, random spurt of creative energy, random spurt of like, hey, this kind of ends up working out for you in a way that maybe you didn't anticipate. And then we get to April 12th, and Venus stations direct at 24 degrees Pisces. And that's when we're done with the retrograde phase of this Venus retrograde. But Venus is still in shadow. She's going to station direct and then move forward again over the same part of the sky that she went retrograde in. She's going to then first conjoin the North Node and Saturn on the same day at 26 degrees Pisces and 27 degrees Pisces. If you have planets at the last degrees of Pisces, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Gemini, this will be affecting you more. But that's on April 24th that Venus conjoins the North Node and Saturn. And this is weird to me because the North Node on Neptune before this was much more like hyper pursuant of like this idealist thing. But then the North Node is like on top of Saturn, where the North Node on top of Saturn is like really hyper pursuant of like reality and structure. So it's really weird. And I feel like Venus going over this area is like, we're now valuing reality. We're now valuing structure. We are valuing like making things more concrete. And again, like I said, I'm doing my best to keep this video focused on the Venus retrograde. And I'm going to be talking about like the eclipses happening during this time, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, Saturn and Neptune both going into Aries, because there's just so much happening in the middle of all of this that it's not just about the Venus retrograde. Then Venus will enter Aries again on April 30th of 2025. This is where, again, it's kind of like, hey, we got clear about what it is that we want. We got clear about what it is that we got to do. But as Venus goes into Aries, there's still going to be some difficulty going about what you're going to go about. But sometimes you just have to like take it. Like by this point, by April 30th, it really seems like, hey, you get clear about what you want. Then Venus goes into Aries and you try to take what's yours, but then it's like, oh, you're not supposed to take that because that's not yours. You then reevaluate what it is that you're supposed to want. Venus stations direct in Pisces where you're like, I know what it is that I want. Venus then goes back into Aries where you go and take what is yours. You go and take what it is that you want without permission, essentially. Like a lot of Venus retrograde in Aries reminds me of like asking for forgiveness rather than permission. Then on May 2nd of 2025, Venus conjoins Neptune now in Aries. It's hard to talk about Neptune in Aries simply because it's such a like longer, bigger transit that you're not really going to see the effects of immediately in your face. But Neptune is about idealism, romanticism, and mysticism, and it's about deception and just like rose-colored glasses stuff. And now it's in the sign of war. It's in the sign of initiation. It's in the sign of beginnings. And so Venus conjoining Neptune is going to be very lucid. It's going to be very weird during this time. And then Venus doesn't actually leave shadow until May 16th of 2025. So again, that's things starting in January, and we don't get it wrapped up until May of 2025. And in between all of this, again, let me remind you what's happening. We have a Mercury retrograde in Aries and in Pisces, and it will also conjoin Neptune in the North Node. We have eclipses happening during this time. We have a lunar eclipse in Virgo that is happening in the middle of this Venus retrograde. We have the spring equinox, which is essentially like the astrological new year. We have Neptune going into Aries. We have Mars leaving shadow and Mars going into Leo during this time. And there's so much more too, because right after Venus leaves shadows when Saturn goes into Aries. And there's just so much going on. But what I want to leave you off with is This Venus retrograde is about reevaluation, and it's really about like, hey, you're going to try to jumpstart something that you think you want. You're going to realize maybe you don't want that. You're going to go backwards and say, you know what, I want to do this instead. And then that, once you get clear about what it is that you want, then you're going to be able to pursue it. And a lot changes in between then. And it's really this Venus retrograde that I think ushers in this new era, this like new era of like really your life. And I know that sounds kind of like over the top big, but you know, I don't like astrologers that say like, oh, this full moon, like any full moon, and they're like, oh my God, this is going to change your life. It's not that deep. This is a lot of change. You're probably not going to live through like Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter will all move zodiac signs within a 9-month period. That doesn't happen. That does not happen. And it's really during this Venus retrograde where we see everything kind of transition and move over, where that's it. It's a big deal. So let's go ahead and start talking about how it's going to be affecting your zodiac sign. But like I said, if you want to keep up to date month by month about what is going to be happening in the astrology and how it's going to be affecting your zodiac sign, make sure you check out my memberships in the link below, where we have monthly rising sign horoscopes, game plans, and everything else. So for the Aries risings, Venus rules over your 7th house of relationships and your 2nd house of money. So anytime Venus is doing anything, it's going to be honestly like influencing those areas of your life. Venus rules over your 7th house of relationships, and she's retrograding in your 1st house of you and yourself. So again, this is a reevaluation of you and your relationship, whether you are single, whether you are married. If you are married, this might be a time of like you and your partner reevaluating where you guys are. You might be more dependent on your partner. Your partner might be more dependent on you, depending on the context. This might also symbolize like a shaky time. But again, think about relationships from spring of 2017, spring of 2009, spring of 2001. These will all be similar. And this is about money too. Venus rules your 2nd house of money, and she's retrograding in your 1st house of you and in detriment, where, I don't know, maybe you spend some money on yourself in a way that maybe you shouldn't have. And Venus is going to retrogress back into your 12th house, where the 12th house rules the subconscious, fears, phobias, hidden enemies, self-sabotage. And the way that I really look at this is there's like a hidden part of relationships and money that you've got to get clear about and get a little bit more like awareness around. And I think that's going to be more of a difficult thing. But really, this Venus retrograde is about a reevaluation of relationships and finances related to you and your subconscious, and what subconscious programs and beliefs do you have kind of like driving right now. For the Taurus risings, Venus rules over your 1st house. So it represents you and yourself and your body. So anytime Venus goes retrograde, it's going to be more of a bigger deal for you than like normal for other people. And Venus also rules over your 6th house. And the 6th house rules ill health, labor, work, pets, co-workers. And the difference between like the 6th house and work is like, the 10th house in your chart is all representative of like your career, like the title that you wear. But the 6th house is the labor that goes into that job. So Venus is going to retrograde in your 12th house of isolation, alienation, hidden enemies, the subconscious, fears, phobias. And it's going to retrogress back into your 11th house of friends and community. Really, the way I would look at this is there's going to be some sort of a fallout with either a coworker or some friends, where a friend becomes an enemy and then a friend again, or a coworker becomes an enemy, but then a friend. There's something along those lines. Now, a good thing that's happening is there seems to be like, again, if you are going to the gym, if you are very active, and if you are looking for friendships, this seems like a big reevaluation of your friendships in general. And so if you get rid of some friends, you will be gaining some friends at the also. But really, I feel like a lot of this is Venus rules your ascendant, and it's retrograding in your 12th house of like self-sabotage, where I wonder if you get in your own way and you mess up your own friendships. But at the end of the day, this is a big reevaluation of your friendships. Who is your friend? Who is not your friend? And you'll also see this manifest in terms of health stuff too. There might be some health issues. I'm not too worried about that at this time for you, but like, it's really just stop being in your head. Make sure you go outside, be like spiritually healthy, and like the physical health will follow after that. So for the Gemini risings, Venus is going to be retrograding in your 11th house of friends and communities and networks back into your 10th house of career. Venus rules your 12th house of hidden enemies, isolation, alienation, the subconscious, as well as your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, children. So Venus rules over 2 kind of weird areas of your chart. But the thing that I would say first is Venus is retrograding in your 11th house of friends, and Venus rules over your 12th house of hidden enemies. So there's definitely a reevaluation of friendships going on here. Who is your friend? Who is not your friend? But she will retrogress back into Pisces, which is your 10th house of career. So for like really the most part, you guys are just having a big career reevaluation, and you'll probably get into a new job, probably something a lot more fun, probably something a lot more creative. It might come from a friend, but the other thing too is as you're reevaluating your career and your friendships, this might be like, hey, who's on your side, who's not on your side. Venus rules your fifth house, and the fifth house rules like games and drugs and alcohol. And so this might be like reevaluating who you hang out with and why you hang out with them. Like what brings you guys together? What do you like to do together? What do you not like to do together? But for the most part, this is just a big reevaluation of your work and your career. And by the time we get to like May, you guys are probably in a different line of work. For the Cancer risings, a lot's going on for you guys. Venus rules your fourth house of home and family and living situation. And it also rules your 11th house of friends and communities and networks. Now, Venus is going to retrograde in your 10th house of career and back into your 9th house of like higher education. So like colleges, social media, publishing, broadcasting, spirituality, and far distance travel. So the way that I would look at this for you guys is, number one, this could be a change in friendships and community based off of work or based off of travel, or also moving. Venus rules your fourth house of home and family, and it's retrograding in your 10th house of career. So this might be like, number one, there might be a change in your career based off where you live, or a change off where you live based off your career. Venus is stationing direct in your 9th house, though, which rules far distance travel, spirituality, publishing, broadcasting, higher education. So there is something about either going back to school or graduating from school or going and traveling or something going on in that area that kind of initiates this changes with both work or living situation. And again, friends get involved too. But the big thing is so much is moving into your guys' 10th house over the next few months that like you guys are just having a really, really big career change by the time we get to like May and June. And you guys have been going through some shit lately. I would argue life starts getting really good mostly around June. So for the Leo risings, Venus rules your 10th house of career. So that means anytime Venus is doing anything, she's going to be dealing with career topics for you. But she also rules your 3rd house. And the 3rd house rules like short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, communication, how you apply knowledge that you have. And it's difficult talking about the 3rd house because it's like, how often are you paying attention to shit that's going on in your 3rd house? Now, Venus is going to retrograde in your 9th house, which the 9th house rules spirituality, religion, higher education, like colleges and universities, far distance travel. So like traveling to foreign countries, publishing, broadcasting. So there's a reevaluation of your work and your career based off the education that you have, based off of traveling, based off of even religious stuff or social media stuff. And Venus is going to retrograde back into your 8th house. And the 8th house rules shared resources, other people's money, death, debt, inheritance. And so this is kind of a weird one for you guys. I would really think about spring of 2017, what was going on there, but there's a reevaluation of like your like traveling or what, if maybe you teach, maybe you go and maybe you teach or you're going to school. There's a reevaluation of that based off of, again, shared resources. Maybe there's some sort of an inheritance that's involved. This might involve stuff with siblings too. It's kind of one of those things of like each Leo rising is going to have these topics come up, but in completely different ways, if that makes sense. But I would really look at, hey, this is a career change related to, again, maybe you're in charge of, someone's finances. You're in charge of a big part of your company's finances. That's a very 10th ruler retrograding in the 8th house sort of a thing. But Venus retrograding in your 9th house too is like, there's some sort of a reevaluation of like your beliefs of that at the same time. Also, there might be like some conflict or fallout with siblings that's happening in the midst of all of this. But it's kind of weird for the Leo risings, but that's the area that's happening for, or that's the area that is being affected for you guys. For the Virgo risings, Venus rules over your 9th house of spirituality, religion, teaching or higher education, publishing, broadcasting, social media, and Venus rules over your 2nd house of money, finances, and resources. And Venus is going to go retrograde in your 8th house of death, inheritance, other people's money, shared resources, and back into your 7th house of relationships. For the most part, a lot of you guys are having a huge reevaluation of relationships, whether you're getting in one or getting out of one. That's kind of the big thing. It's mostly or like it's not even getting in one, getting out one. Like let's say you're together with someone and you're very happy. This is like getting married or something like that. Like there's just a huge reevaluation of relationships for you guys. Again, think about spring of 2017, what was going on with relationships. But at the same time, this has to deal with money stuff too. So maybe you're like in a little bit of debt, or maybe you get to pay off debt at this time. Like the planet that rules your 2nd house of money is in detriment in your 8th house of other people's money. So like if you're in a relationship, maybe your spouse or your partner is more dependent on your finances for income, or vice versa. You're more dependent on someone else's money for your income at this moment. This might also have to deal with school debt. Venus rules your 9th house of, again, like higher education, traveling, and she's retrograding your 8th house of other people's money, where it's like going into debt for school, paying off school debt. That's kind of the vibe to look for. But for the most part, this whole Venus retrograde is about reevaluation of relationships for you, because Saturn and Neptune and the eclipses happening in your 7th house all relationships for you guys, like whether you're getting in one or out of one, or you are reevaluating the relationship, whether it needs to take that next step up or, maybe retract a little bit. For the Libra risings, Venus rules over your ascendant. So it rules over your body, your looks, pretty much you. And Venus rules over your 8th house of other people's money, death, debt, inheritance. So kind of a weird area, right? But Venus is going to go retrograde in your 7th house of relationships. Pretty much, you guys are having a reevaluation of relationships starting in the spring. Now, by the time we get to like May and June, things get really, really serious for better or for worse with relationships. But as Venus retrogrades back into Pisces, which rules your 6th house of pets, ill health, coworkers, employees, there's a reevaluation of like you, yourself, and your body and your health related to your work, possibly with pets. Like there might be some death with pets. There might be some like issues with pets at this time, but there's a big reevaluation of you in relationships and you and your work and your health. For the Scorpio risings, Venus rules over your 12th house of isolation, alienation, repressed, unacknowledged parts of yourself, self-sabotage, hidden enemies, the subconscious, things like that. And Venus rules over your 7th house of relationships. So like a Venus retrograde typically is just going to be like a bigger focus for relationships for you anyway. But Venus is going to retrograde in your 6th house of ill health. So and the 6th house rules ill health, pets, coworkers, employees, like what you do for work. And so there's a big reevaluation of like your health and possibly having health issues, as well as like reevaluating your work and how much energy you put into it. Now, Venus is going to retrograde back into your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, and children. So there is this kind of like, what do you want in relationships as well that's going on? And maybe you think you want something, but that needs to change and you want something else. Big change in terms of like love, romance, sex, drugs, alcohol, partying, children, a big reevaluation of that regarding relationships and regarding like things that you might put on the back burner, things that you kind of subconsciously believe about that, as well as health issues. And I would argue a lot of the health issues right now are coming from like a very spiritual place. Does that make sense? I know that sounds woo-woo, but it's like, it's not just like, oh, you have like a cold and sick, but like what's going on mentally and like, can you clear that up? Can you be more open and receptive to a higher power? And like that will actually change your health. At least that's what the astrology says. For the Sag risings, Venus rules your 11th house of friends and communities and networks. Sometimes Libra, which rules your 11th house, can have your midheaven too, so that it can deal with career topics. But Venus also rules your 6th house of work, ill health, coworkers, employees, and pets. So Venus retrogrades are going to deal with those two issues, but Venus is going to station retrograde in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, and children. And it's going to retrograde back into your 4th house of home and family and living situation. So because Venus rules your 11th house of friends and it's retrograding your 5th house of like fun and creativity, there's a big reevaluation of like, who are your friends and what brings you guys together? There's a reevaluation of the creative part of your life, what you want to put out in the world. And there's a reevaluation of your health related to, again, whether that's partying or fun or sex and things like that. And Venus is going to go back into your 4th house of home and family. So there is going to be a reevaluation of your friends related to your living situation and your work and your labor and your health related to your living situation. And for the most part, there's like a big part of your guys' life that's getting really serious with both family and living situation, and then like creativity, love, sex, romance, and things like that. So then we get to Capricorn risings. Venus rules over your 10th house of your career, reputation, and legacy, and she rules over your 5th house of like love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, and recreation, and children. Venus is going to go retrograde in your 4th house of home and family. So there is a reevaluation of your home, your family, your living situation. Now, because Venus rules your 10th house of career and it's in detriment in your 4th house of living situation, there could be like this, you have to move because of work or because of your living situation change, you have to find a different job or something like that. But Venus also rules your 5th house of love, sex, romance, and connection. So there's some, and children too. So there's some sort of like change with your house or your living situation or your family based off those things. And then Venus is going to retrograde into your 3rd house the 3rd house has a lot of shit going on. It's like short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, communication, applying knowledge that you have. So there's some sort of like, again, like you guys, I don't think are moving across the country, but this is like moving to a different neighborhood and things working out a lot better, if that makes sense. So for the Aquarius risings, Venus rules over your 9th house of spirituality, religion, publishing, broadcasting, social media, teaching, and Venus rules over your 4th house of home and family and living situation. So Venus retrogrades are going to be dealing with those two topics a lot more. And Venus is going to be retrograding in your 3rd house of short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, communication, applying knowledge that you have. And so like your 4th ruler going retrograde into the 3rd is like changes with neighbors, reevaluation of your neighborhood, of the people that you live nearby, Your ninth house ruler going retrograde in the third too is reevaluating the way that you apply the knowledge that you have. But Venus will then station direct in your second house of money. So a lot of this is really about like reevaluating like your finances in a really weird way. Like money will work out for you way, way better. Money's getting super, super serious for you over the next few months. But there's something about a change in your neighbors or people that live close to you in your living situation, and that ends up like benefiting money. I know that sounds super weird, but that's kind of like the idea here. Or again, maybe your ninth house ruler of higher education or travel stations direct in your second house of money. So it's like money to go to school comes through, or possibly money to go on a vacation comes through. That's kind of the idea here. And so for the Pisces risings, Venus rules over your eighth house of other people's money, shared resources, death, debt, and inheritance. And Venus rules over your third house of like short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, local neighborhood, communication, and like applying knowledge that you have. Venus is retrograding your second house of money. And so your eighth ruler of other people's money is in detriment in your second house, which means like either you are dependent on someone else's money for your own income, or vice versa, someone else is dependent on your income for money. And there's a reevaluation of your own finances here based off this other relationship. But Venus is going to station direct in your first house of you, yourself, your identity, your body. And so the big thing to look at with this Venus retrograde is like there's something to do with money. And then again, like communication and short distance travel that like is just a big reevaluation of your money and your identity and your looks. This would be an interesting time to change your looks in some sort of a way. And things really work out. You feel a lot better by the end of it. But there's something to do with money that then is all change about like your body, your looks, your identity, and things like that. And so that's the Venus retrograde. I'm assuming only the Pisces risings are here by the end of it and not too many other people are here by the end of it. So let me know in the comments below what you guys are looking forward to, what you're not looking forward to. Like I said, again, make sure you subscribe to stay up to date with what's going on in the astrology, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.